behalf of the citizens of Belfast, I would like to extend our deepest condolences to the people of the United States of America following the terrible atrocity.
My heartfelt sympathy is with the American people subjected to inhuman terrorist attacks which have taken the lives of thousands of innocent human beings and caused unspeakable sorrow in the hearts of all men and women.
The once mighty twin towers of the World Trade Center, now a tomb for thousands.
The search for those responsible for the attacks leads the FBI to Florida.
And also the people of America join their leaders in remembrance and cries for revenge as well. Hello and welcome back to our coverage. I'm Colleen McEdwards.
And I'm Jim Clancy. We are continuing our extended coverage of America under attack in the aftermath of Tuesday's horrific scene at the World Trade Center and the suicide plane attacks at the Pentagon in Washington as well.
But first, right now, we want to bring you up to date on some of the most recent developments in the investigation. That's the information people really want to hear at this point. We do have some developments in that investigation to tell you about as the FBI identifies the hijackers and brings several people into custody for questioning. In New York City, for example, search and rescue efforts were suspended as debris fell from a heavily damaged building nearby. Thousands of people feared dead in that debris, including hundreds of rescue crews who had arrived on the scene before those towers actually collapsed. U.S. President George W. Bush toured the scene of the attack at the Pentagon as well. He'd spent part of the day calling world leaders to develop a coalition to send a united message against terrorism. Okay, sorry, we're having some trouble with some technical trouble with the machine that actually gives us our tape, so bear with us here for a moment. We're sorry for making you uncomfortable, but we're trying to get it sorted out here. NATO allies offering a strong show of support of the U.S. in the aftermath of these attacks. First time in the alliance's history, right, Jim, that NATO ambassadors are ready to invoke Article 5 of that charter.
It is, and that's a significant move that's being made there. We also saw the United Nations Security Council today, members standing up, a unanimous resolution there as well.
And with that Article 5 invoked, I mean, what that really means is that Washington can count on NATO for support in any military action. I think we've got that sound we wanted to bring you earlier. Let's see if we can roll it.
On September the 12th, the North Atlantic Council met again in response to the appalling attacks perpetrated yesterday against the United States of America. The Council agreed that if it is determined that this attack was directed from abroad against the United States, it shall be regarded as an action covered by Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which states that an armed attack against one or more of the allies in Europe or in North America shall be considered an attack against them all.
All right, we want to focus more now on the rapidly developing investigation into who the suspects were and where they exactly came from. A massive investigation is focused on two corners of the United States. We will hear more on inquiries in Florida in just a moment. But first, hundreds of FBI agents have also been deployed in the Boston area, where two of the four hijacked planes began their fateful journeys. Sources telling CNN that two of the hijackers apparently crossed from Nova Scotia, Canada by ferry to the port of Bar Harbor in the state of Maine. On Wednesday, the FBI took into custody several people at a hotel in Boston. They were not placed under arrest, but authorities say they could provide important material information related to the attacks. Earlier, a car was removed from Boston Airport. That car contained materials, including flight manuals, written in Arabic that law enforcement sources tell us are helpful to the investigation.
At the same time, investigators are combing through documents, home computers, and flight school records in the state of Florida. Susan Candiotti told us earlier that authorities there suspect that some of the hijackers received flight training there in Florida.
The FBI indeed has leads on suspected hijackers that were involved in this terrorist attack. They are still hijackers who attended flight schools here in Florida. And at this hour, the FBI continues to look at other flight schools here in Florida. Law enforcement sources say that 2 of the suspected hijackers, at least 2 of them, lived here in Vero Beach. 2 of them are brothers that lived here. One of them lived on this very street. Both are described as Saudi citizens. One of them is Adnan Bukhari. Adnan Bukhari, we have a photograph of him. He is said to be in his 40s. He is described as a commercial pilot for Saudi Arabian Airlines. Also living in Vero Beach, Bukhari's brother Amir. Both lived here with their wives and children. Now, this afternoon, we also had a chance to go inside one of their rented homes. This is the one rented by Adnan Bukhari. It was searched this day by the FBI, and according to documents left behind by agents, they seized a number of items, including a computer software, U.S. immigration papers, bank receipts, phone cards, a flight safety bag. We also saw a pilot's certificate, as well as a certificate that they had received specialized instruction on multi-engine planes. These pilots, we are told by law enforcement sources, attended Flight Safety International, a flight school here in Vero Beach. Law enforcement sources also tell CNN that the Bukhari brothers were believed to have been on one of the 2 flights out of Boston, one of those 2 flights that wound up slamming into the World Trade Center. Also, we can report to you that a car impounded in Portland, Maine, according to law enforcement authorities, was rented at Boston Logan Airport and driven to Portland, Maine. Now, the Maine State Police confirmed that 2 of the suspected hijackers were on a U.S. air flight out of Logan Airport, again, one of the 2 planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. The FBI also looking at 2 more suspected hijackers who spent some time both in Venice, Florida, as well as Coral Springs, Florida, which is located in the south. The 2 are Mohammed Atta and Marwan Youssef al-Shahi. Now, they stayed for a few days at the home of Charlie Voss in Venice, Florida, and they took courses at Hoffman Aviation. These people both had passports from the United Arab Republic.
What investigators want to know as well, what exactly happened on board those airliners after they had been seized by the hijackers. CNN's Kelly Arena has obtained transcripts of the events in the cockpit of one of the doomed planes, United Flight 93.
As CNN has reported throughout the day, a microphone was keyed open on the hijacked flight that crashed in Pennsylvania. Now, CNN has obtained a partial transcript of what was heard by air traffic control from the cockpit. That's United Airlines Flight 93. It actually departed Newark for San Francisco. It was flying at 35,000 feet over the Cleveland area. Now, at this point, air traffic controllers heard shouting in the cockpit with someone yelling, "Get out of here." The microphone is momentarily turned off. It comes back on, some scuffling is heard, and again a voice yells, "Get out of here." The microphone is again turned off. When it is turned on again, it's clear that the pilot is no longer in the cockpit. Someone is heard speaking in broken English in what was described as an Arabic accent, telling passengers, quote, "There's a bomb on board. This is the captain speaking. Remain in your seat. There is a bomb on board. Stay quiet. We are meeting with their demands. We are returning to the airport." Now, to supplement that transcript, we do have some information on what was going on outside the cockpit. Family members of one passenger who phoned his family on his cell phone said the passengers, after learning that the World Trade Center had been hit, had voted to attack the terrorists. Nothing else, unfortunately, was heard from the passengers after that. That flight did hold 38 passengers and a crew of 8.
While the investigation continues, so does the daunting task of clearing away the wreckage. Many New Yorkers have spent hours searching hospitals. They've been looking for missing loved ones and friends. The city's political leaders warn the final death toll is going to be climbing and climbing relentlessly. New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani says he still cannot be more specific about estimating the eventual death toll. 6,000 body bags have been ordered. The scenes of devastation shocked the governor of New York.
Just this afternoon, I was at Bellevue visiting a fallen firefighter who had been hospitalized, and I went up and congratulated him, and he got this smile on his face, and he looked at me, and it was like a line out of a movie, and he said in this thick accent, "What'd you expect? I'm a New Yorker." That's the spirit that is allowing us to get through this tragedy.
Well, despite the spirit, there are still some tensions running high, including just a few hours ago there was a bomb scare. People evacuated at the Empire State Building and Penn State Station.
Authorities saying at one point they did have some sniffer dogs that did come up with something, but the all clear was given. People allowed to go back in. About 20 minutes later, it didn't last long.
Well, the individual stories of tragedy and bravery only just beginning to emerge as emergency workers search the rubble. From New York, we're joined now once again by Garrick Utley. Garrick.
Well, Jim, I was just thinking the fact that we had this bomb scare here on 34th Street right next to us an hour or so ago. It was a hoax, of course. We've, of course, seen the tragic figures in Lower Manhattan, the continuing rescue efforts, what happened at the Pentagon, and just a moment ago, this very thorough report on the investigation. And the fact that these suspects, who are now believed to have been involved in these terrorist attacks, were operating and living so freely here in the United States, brings us to the subject of fear, of anxiety, mounting fear of anxiety, which is perhaps natural. How do we confront it, and what is it? Where is the enemy? Is he or she out there? Is it within us here in the United States, or indeed in ourselves? So here are some thoughts about fear and how we're going to confront it.
The parallel has been drawn between these sneak attacks in 2001 and the one on Pearl Harbor in 1941. And how both were
a date which will live in infamy.
Except that 60 years ago, President Roosevelt and the nation knew who the enemy was. And since the enemy in Asia and Europe in World War II wasn't hiding, the full weight of American power could be mobilized to achieve victory. Half a century later, the United States could do it again against an enemy who couldn't hide. But now the face of the enemy is invisible, if not as terror and destruction. And we discover the advantage an enemy has who can choose the time, place, and weapons of war. That is what happened in Vietnam, where superior American military strength was inferior to the tactics of a largely invisible enemy and its willingness to take casualties. And the enemy is not always found in war. One of the greatest tests to face Americans was the Great Depression. Americans were fearful about their future in 1933 when Franklin Roosevelt warned that the invisible enemy was within.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed effort to convert retreat into advance.
And advancing is where we are right now in the United States, not just in the rescue efforts or the investigation to find out who was responsible, but also in recognizing that the very fear of terrorism can become the enemy.
And perhaps that is nothing more than inevitable in this new era we seem to be in, where the front line in international conflict can be anywhere, including the Pentagon, or right here in Lower Manhattan. Colleen, back to you.
All right, Garrick, thanks. And I suppose fear from people as well, because they realize that an act of terrorism like this doesn't require a sophisticated bomb that gets past authorities, doesn't require special plastic explosives or a timing device made in a faraway country like we saw in the Lockerbie case. All it requires is a highly trained suicide pilot to buy a ticket and get on a plane.
One of the things we're going to see in the weeks and the months to come is a renewal of this very difficult debate over how we are going to protect ourselves against these so-called rogue states or rogue organizations, terrorists large or small. As we know, there's been this debate over a missile defense system. The supporters of that say, hey, this is even further proof that these guys are dangerous. We have to spend billions on this. Or on the contrary, will people say in Congress and decide that No, the real danger is coming from these kinds of attacks, or perhaps chemical or biological attacks. So the question of fear